What's up, everybody? Andrew Cooper here. This is Alarm Fantasy Football, and we have a special show for you today because tomorrow is the NFL draft. And I have somebody with me that I've had the privilege to talk to the last 2 years, a guy that is plugged in, boots on the ground. And for me personally, as a tight end enthusiast, as an NFL enthusiast, somebody that I always want to talk to before the draft, if possible, my guy, Brandon Huffman. He's the national recruiting editor for 247. Huff, what's happening, man? How busy are you this time of year?
Oh man, I mean, there's been camps, combines, showcases every weekend. It feels like since the beginning of the year. We got the draft coming up. We've got our 2026 rankings on 24/7 dropped this morning. There is no dull moments at all until like July or August.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing with you is that we're all we're all obsessing over the draft, but you still have to keep your eyes on future classes, man, because you're deep in it. You do the Polynesian Bowl, you do all this stuff, and that's why I love talking to you because with a lot of the guests we have a lot of fantasy skewing guests. A lot of people that do the spreadsheet stuff. We talked about breakout score, you and I, before the show, but you actually talk to a lot of these guys. You
Mhm.
have the boots on the ground for real scouting. So it just gives us another flavor that we don't really get. And I don't want to take up too much time talking myself. So the first thing first, I want to talk to you, tight end. You played tight end yourself. You got a good handle on it stuff. Got to ask about Brock Bowers. He's the big name in this class. For you, is he as special as people are making him out to be? And if so, why? If not, why? Where do you land with Bowers?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. You mentioned that boots on the ground. I was the only person in the recruiting industry that went and saw him play in person. And it was partly skewed by the fact that he didn't play his senior year. He enrolled early in Georgia. He was part of that COVID impacted 2021 class. So when he really had his breakout year, it was over the course of his junior season. And schools were recruiting him as a linebacker at the beginning.
Really?
And, his senior year got pushed back to the spring. So he was already in Athens by that time. But I went and saw him play. I was writing a piece this week, kind of look back to top recruits that are being ranked. And I remember talking to him after his game, and he was talking about how Michigan and Notre Dame had recruited him for their jack linebacker position. And I thought that was fascinating because, in retrospect, it's clearly that he's not a linebacker. He played linebacker. The game I went to, he had an 85-yard touchdown run. He took an end around, fly sweep, and was gone. And so you could see the athleticism. But talking to him in the middle of his junior season, schools thought he was a defensive player, and he would go on to have probably one of the best careers ever for a tight end. So yes, he's every bit as good of a player as he's projected to be, as the draft is slotting him to be. Even though he's not the most conventional built tight end, when you look at some of the other tight ends in the NFL that have flourished, but he's got just so many traits that make him generational. And I think what he did at Georgia the past 3 seasons, what he did, knowing that he was the focal point of Georgia's offense for the last 2 years when he was healthy against the biggest, fastest, strongest defenses in the country, you can't ignore what Brock Bowers did at the collegiate level. And I think it's going to be a seamless transition for him to the NFL.
It's funny you mentioned he had that rushing touchdown in high school junior year because that has translated. I mean, he had 5 rushing touchdowns last year, 75-yard touchdowns. So I mean, and that's been the beautiful thing for him, right? He broke out early and he never stopped being good, which is it's honestly pretty rare to see a guy stay healthy and do that back to back to back 1,000 yards, man. So uh, if you had to venture a guess, I mean, the sports books are saying I'm seeing a lot of 12 and a half, pick 12 and a half over under, 11 and a half over under. You think he goes top 10, or do you think he's more a mid-round type guy?
I mean, I think he projects best as a top 10 to top 12 guy. A lot of it just depends on needs and what teams are going to draft. I mean, as a player, he's a top 5 to top 7 player. But as we know with the draft, sometimes what you're rated in terms of what your positional value is compared to what you are as a player is vastly different.
Right.
But
And
I mean, in my opinion, he should be in the green room very shortly if he's even going to be in the green room.
right. And that's the thing is that, not only positional need, but also in the modern NFL contracts, man. If we were just drafting talent, then it would go one way. But people look at it and say, okay, I got to pay this corner, this wide receiver, quarterback, O line. That 5th-year option is more valuable. The rookie contract period is more valuable. So I get it, but no, I'm with you, man. I love him. So after Bowers, there's kind of a big drop off in many people's opinion. For you, is there any clear cut tight end too, or is it more just like a group of guys you like and somebody might emerge? What are your thoughts on the next group?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Jatavian. Excuse me, I got something stuck in my throat. A Jatavian Sanders. I look back in that 2021 class, he was the number one ranked athlete in the country, and he was a 5-star player, a guy that we thought was an elite player. Just what was he going to play in college? Was he a receiver? Was he a defensive guy? Was he a tight end? Which he ultimately became, and became a very good and valuable piece for Texas's offense. And you saw how the early part of Steve Sarkisian's time in Austin compared to the last 2 years, how the offense really picked up. And I think it's the emergence of players like Xavier Worthy at the receiver position, another player I went and saw him play. The same week I went and saw Brock Bowers. And then you have, Sanders, who has grown into be what that athlete label kind of says. Like there's no athlete on the field. There's no athlete position on the field, but you get a guy who can play a multitude of positions. And I think he is the clear number 2 guy. And, that kind of just goes back to his high school days where he was an elite football player. It's just a matter of what spot he was going to be elite at.
Right. And I love when I watch him, one thing I love is that he's all like, with a lot of these tight ends, the nature of the position, they get the ball in their hand and they're just like looking around, who's going to tackle me? Where's this going to end? Sanders is not like, he's looking to make plays. Like when he gets the ball in his hand, he's like Antonio Brown. He'll run backwards, he'll move around. So he's interested in that. Which kind of
and what's interesting about him too is that he's a young guy. He's one of those younger players in an era where being on the West Coast and being from Southern California, it's not uncommon to have guys play their senior years at 19 years old. Guys will be turning 19 early in their senior year. I remember a few years ago there was a player who voted in the 2020 presidential election as a junior. I turned 18 6 weeks before I started college. So Sanders, isn't he? I think he just turned 21. And, he's going to the NFL. So this guy is a guy who played, essentially to his age 30 years ago in an era where you're seeing holdbacks and double holdbacks. And that's what makes them so fascinating, is that he still has physical development that he still may be able to do when you look at some of the quarterbacks in this draft, that guys that played in college for 6 years, guys that were seniors in high school when he was a freshman in high school, and they're going to be drafted in the same draft. That's another thing that's pretty exciting about him.
Yeah, it's like Brandon Weeden was 28 when he was drafted?
I don't even think the internet was invented when he was in high school.
That's right, dude. Yeah. But I will say this, there's, especially in your dynasty drafts, folks watching and listening at home, that's a huge advantage, because you look at a guy like Kyle Pitts, right? He was equally young, 21 when he came out. Guys like Travis Kelce, he had his first 1,000-yard season at 27. Zach Ertz had his first 1,000-yard season at 28. Kyle Pitts had his at 21 years old, and he's 23 years old right now. So if he does turn it around with Kirk Cousins, you didn't miss anything by rostering the last 2 years. He's the age that he should have, that you normally are. So Sanders falls in that class. I did want to mention this. So every time I talk to you, you bring a level of insight, and I especially mentioned the fact that you talk to a lot of these guys and you have boots on the ground, right? So with in the past, you've mentioned that in talking with guys like Luke Musgrave, I remember you specifically mentioned Josh Downs, which I'm glad to have him on a lot of rosters because he popped last year and he's not even a full-time player yet. And you said that these guys have something special, a certain level of grit and competitiveness that you kind of look for first and foremost. And you've mentioned with a number of players where you're like, before we get into the metrics and the size and the hand size and all that stuff, let's first figure out, do these guys have the drive? Do they have what it takes to play ball at a high level? Is there anybody? And for this one, I know we like to talk tight ends, but I'll open this one up to anything because you dropped some names on us, Caleb and Josh Downs, that I thought was very enlightening. So as far as tight ends or anybody else, somebody that when you talk to them, you feel like they have that focus, they have that kind of grit.
Timeout sidebar. I told you too that Josh Downs' brother is a pretty good little football player, and
Caleb,
he's decent. He's got a chance to be good. I think SEC Freshman of the Year.
A
guy that I think is going to end up being a pretty good pro in a couple of years. But in terms of just finding some guys that maybe aren't getting a lot of buzz right now, or they were overshadowed by teammates, a guy that I'm a big fan of, and I go back to the high school days. and that's Jalen McMillan out of the University of Washington. He had
Everybody at
kind of
home, get your notebook out right now. These are the
yeah.
dogs. This is the dog list. Jalen
I
McMillan,
mean,
number one.
Jalen McMillan, he's from Fresno. He's got a natural chip on his shoulder. If you know anything about the West Coast, Fresno has always got a chip on their shoulder because they're Central California. They're not the Bay Area. They're not LA. They're not San Diego. So they naturally come up with a little bit more. And what's crazy is Jalen McMillan and Xavier Worthy were on the same 7-on-7 team in high school. And two names that you'll probably hear next year, Jeremiah Hunter, who's now at Washington, was at Cal, and Torrey Horton, who's now at Colorado State. They were all four of those guys on the same 7-on team. But Jalen McMillan was a year older than Xavier Worthy. Fantastic receiver, just missed being a 5-star. And then he gets to Washington, and you have the Jimmy Lakes disaster. You have a little bit of injuries, but he really broke out his 2022 season with Penix. And him and Rome Odunze were a hell of a 1-2 punch. Then he had some injury issues this year. But if you saw the Sugar Bowl, one of the biggest, and really going back to the Pac-12 championship game, Oregon knew Rome Odunze. They knew what he could do. He had done it to them for the previous couple of years, but Jalen McMillan coming back healthy for that game really threw a wrench into Oregon's defense. And so he's not getting the attention that Rome Odunze is, and understandably so. Even Jalen Polk's getting more buzz right now if you look at the Washington receivers. But Jalen McMillan is a guy that I think is going to be a really good number 2 receiver in the NFL, and a guy that I think could end up having a pretty prosperous career. A dog. I mean, there's a reason Fresno State calls themselves the Bulldogs. They just kind of have that Bulldog mentality. And while he didn't go to Fresno State, he is from the 559. So that's kind of my one guy that if you're looking for a position, a receiver where it's hard to you hear all the sexy names all year long, he'd be a name to know and kind of tuck away.
Well, that's great because I actually struggled with ranking Jalen Polk with Polk and McMillan in my rankings into which one to put first or second. So you think we should go McMillan here?
I say go McMillan. I do love Polk. I got to stick with my West Coast roots, and I got to stick with the Golden State. Nothing against the Lone Star State, except that you guys are really good at producing quarterbacks, like the best one in the NFL. But I'm gonna go with Jalen McMillan on this one.
Awesome. I got a little so that what you had just said about these guys all playing together, growing up. I got a little side question for you. Because I've been thinking about this with and you're plugged in with the recruiting and the pipeline and everything. With the 30 NFL team visits, there's a little wrinkle where if a player went to a local school or grew up locally, you can bring them in as an NFL team and talk to them and not have that count against your 30 visits, which as a Patriots fan, I've been thinking about because Massachusetts, not a notorious hotbed of NFL talent. We've got Matt Ryan with the school up here, Anthony Sherman. Not a whole lot. But so how big of an advantage do you think that is? Is that even really an advantage, or do they give these teams enough resources that you can bring guys in and figure that out?
Yeah, it doesn't hurt. You look back historically, and it wasn't unusual to see guys that played at USC and UCLA go to the Rams and the Raiders back in the 90s. I think now because the game is so global, and especially because it's so national, I think back to a time where this kind of touches on what you're saying, and it kind of doesn't, but the familiarity. I remember when Pete Carroll was hired by the Seattle Seahawks out of USC in 2010. And that draft, all the buzz was Taylor Mays is from Seattle, went to O'Day High School, played for Pete at USC. Naturally, he's going to be the safety that the Seahawks picked. Well, they picked Earl Thomas.
Right.
Charles Brown, a Southern Californian who had spent 4 years playing for Pete Carroll. Naturally, he's going to be the left tackle that the Seattle Seahawks picks. Well, he picks Russell Okung. So
which were the right picks too.
With the right picks and clear anchors on Super Bowl winning teams and teams that got to the Super Bowl. And so I think, and I'm seeing this a lot, living in the Seattle area right now with the Seahawks having a need at quarterback with, Geno Smith, probably not the long-term answer with, Drew Lock's time there not being remarkable. And now they've got Sam Howell. There's a lot of buzz. Hey, are the Seahawks in position to take Michael Penix? Now, if Michael Penix played at Indiana still, and he still had the same kind of success that he had with the Huskies at Indiana the last 2 years, the Seahawks fans would be freaking out that, this guy who's from Indiana, who's had multiple injuries, is the long-term pick. Well, yes, the change of scenery helped, and it changed the entire trajectory of his career. But I think college fans who are fans of that NFL team, get more excited about it. And I think at the end of the day, the NFL team's still going to say, hey, they might be local, but we need to get the best person for. We're going to still put 70,000 people in the stadium. We're still going to sell these jerseys. This isn't like, the NBA or baseball where one player transfixes
Moves the
everything,
needle.
and
Yeah.
it does, and gets the fans to buy in. This isn't like that. This is one of those like, hey, it's one of the 7 or 8 picks you're going to have in the draft. You're probably going to be a free agent type team anyway, and you may have to wait 3 or 4 years. So I don't think it's
not that
a net positive. I think it's just a cool anecdote in a lot of cases.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And again, it maybe matters more for like the undrafted tier of guys where it's like, hey, you can bring them in and check them out and, and get that information on them and get an extra look at those guys. But at the top, yeah, you got to make the best pick. And as you kind of say, very rare do you get a Joey Porter Jr. situation where he just so happens everything lines up perfect and he goes to the Steelers. In most cases, it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the Steelers and ones that didn't work, I mean, for fantasy purposes, hasn't worked out so far. I got to give you credit. I give you tons of credit all the time on stuff, but this one I got to give you credit for because you specifically came on our show and you talked about Darnell Washington, and you told us because I was worried that he might not be a pass catcher a little bit, but you told us that there were conversations that were had that you were part of and that you knew people about that said that he could potentially even that people wanted him to switch to offensive tackle. And that at the NFL level, even if he's classified as a tight end, he could play a lot of offensive tackle or even be the next George Fant, who's drafted as a tight end and becomes an offensive tackle. And sure enough, then this is before the draft. Sure enough, he gets drafted, and Mike Tomlin basically says, this guy's a 6 offensive lineman. So you saved a lot of us on that one. Is there anybody from this tight end class where you look at it, and especially with the new kickoff rules, where teams are going to be looking for guys that, it could push up some of these guys that might not be pass catchers because they can help on special teams and kickoffs. Are there any of these tight ends where, and I don't want you to put anybody down, but they might not really pan out as pass catchers for us fantasy football folks? Is there anybody that fits that bill?
Yeah, I would say like there's 2 that come to mind. Jarrett Wiley out of TCU, interestingly enough, was a quarterback when he was in high school, went to Texas to play tight end before he transferred to TCU, but a guy that I think is really well served as that blocking tight end. And then, same choking thing that I had a minute ago. Eric All out of Iowa, a big physical tight end. Just another guy that I think, when we think Iowa, we all want them to be goodness gracious, I'm blanking. George Kittle,
Hawkinson, Kittle. I mean,
but
Porta, right?
Exactly. But in a lot of cases, sometimes those guys are plus blockers, and I think as an old school tight end myself, as a tight end who played in the Veer offense, I value those tight ends that can block. Now, granted, I look at a guy like Brock Bowers, and he's generational because of what he does with the ball in his hands and what he does running routes, but Brock was a physical player in high school. He just was utilized at Georgia as a big time receiver. Where I think in the case of you become, and I look at guys like a guy that we covered a few years ago. He has our number 1 tight end in the country, Colby Parkinson, went on to Stanford, and you look at when you go look at those great Stanford teams under Jim Harbaugh and David Shaw. He had 4 tight ends on the field at any given time. He'd have Zach Ertz and Levine Toilolo, and Ertz would be his main receiver, but he was a great blocker. Levine Toilolo ended up being drafted despite being not much of a pass catcher during that time. And then Ryan Hewitt came in as a tight end, was basically playing fullback. You also had Kobe Fleener. So blocking gets you on the field. And that's one of those positions where if you can do everything or one of the 2 things really, really well, you're going to get on the field. You may not get a lot of targets, but you're going to be on the field. That's the way we're seeing somebody double tight end. And then Colby Parkinson signs a 2nd contract and he goes back home and to play for the LA Rams. And so I think, Wiley and All are probably the 2 guys that, probably fit that bill the best, that maybe, they're definitely plus receivers, but where I think they really can flourish is their ability to be inline blockers.
Right. And us in fantasy land, we have to take a step back and remember Mercedes Lewis is rich. Michael Pruitt is rich. These guys are multimillionaires. They don't care, man. Tyler Croft, these guys will block. And there's a lot of guys that we loved in fantasy land that, aren't in the league right now. So
19 years, I think, for Mercedes Lewis he had his great receiving years with the Jags a decade ago and carved out a great second career because the guy does not hesitate to block. It's like being a left-handed pinch hitter. You can carve yourself out. You get a couple hits a year, you get 7 to 10 hits a year, you're going to play in the major leagues for a long time.
Those guys, honestly, they do last. They have more longevity in that side. So,
Mhm.
got to give it to them. I want to ask you real quick one specific guy because you mentioned Brock Bowers, and it is unique and difficult to be that guy that becomes Mark Andrews or Evan Ingram because you do need to be a better pass. If you're just going to catch passes, you got to catch passes as good as the wide receiver, right?
Mhm.
And the bonus that you can block better than them is what keeps you out there. But I want to since we love Brock Bowers, I want to ask you your thoughts on Jaheim Bell. Similar size, the athleticism not quite as like he obviously doesn't have like the vertical and stuff that Brock Bowers, but what do you? My concern is that he might end up being like a Cameron Braid or a Anthony Ferguson, like a part time guy. But is
Mhm.
there what are your thoughts? Do you think he could end up being a full time guy?
I do. And I think it's because of his ability to make plays. I mean, this is a guy who we were super high on as a high school player. And again, I go back to, with Sanders, we rated him as an athlete because he could play a number of positions. He was a return guy, he was a receiver, and he just bulked up. And, that's something that people fail to take into account with a lot of these high school guys is their bodies are not done developing. So you look at a guy that might be, and I had this conversation with West Coast guys all the time, and I see it in college. G. Scott, who's likely going to be a tight end at Ohio State, the starting tight end this year, was a receiver in high school, but he was 220 in high school. Well, you're going to naturally get bigger when you get to
Right.
college, but you're going to, as a receiver, you're struggling to keep the weight off so you could keep your speed instead of embracing, I'm just going to put that weight on, and now I can be a plus receiver, but I've got the bulk. And so, you look at a guy like Bell that can do that because he does have that ability to make plays once he's got the ball in his hands. He's a smooth player. He's
Yeah.
very athletic. He's very agile. He can handle contact. He doesn't go down on arm tackles. And he's a great receiver. He's a great pass catcher. And I think that that's something that gets you on the field in a pass-friendly game. 20 years ago, a guy like Bell probably doesn't make a roster. He probably, gets into camp. But now in 2024, he's a guy that is becoming a potential day 2 pick because of that ability to make plays with the balls in his hand.
Yeah, and I mean, you look around the league at like the tight end screens with like Evan Ingram, Trey McBride, David Njoku, right? I mean, as a Patriots fan, I'm like Alex Van Pelt's in town. He called 20 tight end screens last year. I don't know, the Patriots called 0 last year, so I don't know. A spot where you get a guy like that who's just creates a mismatch, especially in the modern NFL. Could be exciting. All right, let me. I want to keep you. I will keep you all day if I could, but I don't want to. I know you got things to do, man. Let me just ask real quick before we wrap this. Any other tight ends? We talked Brock Bowers. We talked Tavian Sanders. We talked Gene Bell. You mentioned a couple guys that could go the blocking route. Broke my heart with Eric All, but I trust you, man. You've never steered me wrong yet. Anybody else you want to mention that for fantasy gamers to keep an eye on if they go like round 2 or 3 that we can get real excited about?
I don't know that he goes in the second or third round. He might be a guy that goes, early part of Saturday, but I am a big Jack Westover fan. And that's partly
Ooh.
because I watched him play in high school. And, when you look at some of those key moments this season where Washington needed 3 yards, they needed 4 yards to keep a drive alive. And, as great of a season as Washington had, I think their last 9 games were all decided by 10 points or less before they got to the national championship game, which meant that they needed clutch plays to be made. And Jack Westover became a big time security blanket for Michael Penix. He was a walk on. This is a guy that at Washington, you look back at their tight end room, just a few years ago when he got there, you had Kate Otten, you had Hunter Bryant. You ultimately had Devin Culp, who's been there for a long time, who had a great combine himself, despite being more of a second and third option at tight end and receiver. But I think Jack Westover is a guy that's going to, get into a training camp and get on a 53-man roster because he will do the little things as well, but he becomes a quarterback's best friend. And again, he's not going to wow you. He's not a household name outside of the Pacific Northwest. Again, he was a walk-on
Right.
who basically willed himself into being an NFL guy. Reminds me a little bit of Greg Dulcich, who was a walk-on at UCLA. I think ultimately ended up a third-round pick, might have been a fourth-round pick of the Broncos, but would do those little things. And then when given the opportunity to be a receiver for Dorian Thompson-Robinson, flash big plays. Now, Westover is not the guy that's going to get you 80-yard touchdowns and outrun DBs like Dulcich, but he got himself on the field and became a huge part of the most potent offense in college football because he'd do the little things, but then he would do those big things and make those catches in traffic and keep drives alive. And I think that this is a guy that's going to, carve out a nice career because he's already bet on himself and he's won big.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I love looking at first downs and first downs per route run because in real life football land, there's 2 things that matter: touchdowns and first downs. And I guess
Yep.
if all else fails, converting that field goal, but it's really those 2 things. That's what matters. And I will say for as far as target competition, 3 wide receivers are expected to be drafted. You mentioned Devin Culp ran a 2.47. So if you're mixing matching tight ends, you're never going to have Culp with his hand in the dirt. So I mean, you can kind of explain away the stats that way. So, all right,
Mhm.
Jack Westover, we'll take a look. All right, dude, I love having you on, man. It's the best. There's 2 people every year that I have to talk to tight ends, Brandon
Hmm.
Huffman and the other one's Jake Bott, who we talked to. You gotta get those guys in. So I really appreciate you. Why don't you tell everybody what you have going on? And I have to mention I've been thinking a lot about you because I this year had my first child, a baby girl. She's 8 months old now, man, and just I always think about you and your situation, the great things that you're doing, and I donate every year. So let everybody know what you got going on and where everybody can follow you.
Yeah, work wise, like I said, if you're into college football recruiting, we just updated our class of 2026, which means those guys will be draft eligible in 2029. So it's only 5 years away. So, get to know those names. If you're in those Devy leagues, you can start to get some of these names that are 2 years away from starting college ball. Just drop those. But the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation is near and dear to my heart. It was established in 2016 after our 7.5-year-old daughter passed away from a brain tumor that was cancerous upon diagnosis and terminal upon diagnosis. And in fact, over the last 10 days, we've donated $30,000 to two different labs, $60,000 in the last 10 days to 2 labs that are doing major work in the brain cancer treatment phase for children in the pediatric world. And so donations are going into action, and we're supporting 2 major labs that are not just on the West Coast, but they're doing national and international work in the DIPG community. So we're going to continue to fight in her honor, continue to fight back for her so that no other family has to go through what we go through, that there's going to be opportunities for their child to have this monster eradicated.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing what you guys are doing. I'll tell you when I and folks out there at home, you should do this too. When you get in arguments on Twitter or Reddit or whatever, I always go, hey, you know how we settle this? $25 to the charity of your choice.
I love
When I'm right, it goes right to the Avery Strong. So
Keep arguing that. Keep doing that.
I do win or lose. You know what I mean? If I lose, I donate to whatever they got. But hey, you know what? I'm
Love
winning a
it.
lot of the time too. So hey, Huff, you're the man. Thank you so much. Shout out to Joel Cox, who put us together and does a great job over there. So cheers, my man. And I hope that all your touts and all your guys that you've been following for 6, 7 years, the rest of us just catching up with. I hope they all go to great landing spots and make a lot of money.
I hope so too.
Cheers, brother. Thank you, man. All right, everybody, dude. There was the legendary Brandon Huffman in here talking ball, talking about players that he's talked to, followed for a long time here, dude. What a star. So definitely check out his content. Definitely donate to his foundation, doing great things over there. I saw some questions in the chat, general questions about the draft. I had to get Huff's tight end takes because he's like, people call me the tight end whisperer. I am for fantasy football. This guy for recruiting, for everything, like he's on another level. He straight up talks to these guys. Like he saved us from Darnell Washington. So had to get him in here. He's the best. I'm gonna go through, check out your chat. What we're gonna do here in the second half, I just want to go through because tomorrow is such a big day. I want to go through the draft and let you know where the hot spots are for fantasy football. And I'm going to talk about my mock and what I think is going to happen, even though that's secondary. You know what I mean? Like my predictions on mock drafts are ridiculously difficult in general. So I'll give you my ideas, but that doesn't matter as much as us sitting back and thinking, okay, Dan Servadidio and I, we went through, we wrote up the players that we like. We were kind of splitting guys into different categories of what they can do, what they can't do. And now in the draft, we sit back and say, okay, if this guy goes this high in the draft to this spot, we love it. If this guy falls out and doesn't end up in a good spot, then we have to adjust, right? We can't just completely disregard the draft. So why don't we go through now, take a little peek at some hot spots and see what's going on. And I'll tell you right now, if you want to take advantage of the information that we get from Huff and that we get from the draft and what we do basically all offseason on this channel, go to myffpc.com, use promo code Coop. They'll give you 25 bucks when you deposit 35 or more as a first time depositor. And you can go in and do a startup draft. They're going on right now. Mile High Luke and I have been going through one on the Discord, some of his picks, who to take late, who not to. If you're a Fantasy Alarm member, you could hit me up directly and we'll talk it out. We'll get you set up with a great team. The other thing you can do is you can grab one of these orphan teams. And now is the perfect time to do that. What I mean by orphan team are people that have teams already and they decide they don't want to play anymore and they leave. Those teams go up for sale, often at a discount, right? And you can go in and buy that team and keep all the players you like and trade away all the players you don't, who other people will still like, right? And then you have picks in the rookie draft to make this week. Obviously, you want to, if possible, grab one that still has the rookie picks that hasn't traded them away. So go to myffpc.com. Use promo code Coop if you're first time depositor. They'll give you 25 bucks. You deposit 35 or more. That QR code's been flashing, and we have a link in the description. So you can go get set up there. And again, those orphan teams, perfect time to grab one either today or tomorrow before the draft because you get to make rookie picks right away. You can make a bunch of trades, trade away guys you don't like during the draft. So it's great. So in the NFL draft, let's go through and just look at the first round and figure out where the hot spots for fantasy are. First, number one pick, Bears. Caleb Williams is almost certainly going to go there. We don't really need to dig too much into that pick, to be honest. Like, let's spend more time on the interesting picks, right? Number two, Commanders. I wouldn't necessarily call it a hot spot. If people know my stance on this, which is that historically speaking, the QB1 has a hit rate, even if it's the first overall pick or anywhere else, has a much higher hit rate. QB1 as a first overall pick has a incredibly higher pick rate than everyone else. So Caleb Williams is your QB1. My research and everything I've looked at says that you need to truly know something special and you need to believe something special to draft a different quarterback if a quarterback is taken 2 overall. So what I mean is this. For me personally, I like Jaden Daniels. I like Drake May. Knowing the hit rates and knowing the success rates and knowing the math, whichever one the Commanders take at 2 is the one I'm most likely to take as my QB2. If it's Jaden Daniels, I will almost certainly rank him 2. If it's Drake May, I will almost certainly rank him 2. And that's if a QB goes to the Patriots at 3 or another team trades up and takes a QB, that's not going to change the way I operate because uh, difference making quarterbacks can transform franchises. We've for years called the Texans a poverty franchise and made fun of the Texans. Oh my God, they're trading away DeAndre Hopkins. They wasted Andre Johnson. Doesn't matter. The CJ Stroud showed up as an elite player, and now everything has changed, right? And that's happened many times. But the Buffalo Bills, right, and like all the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now we respect these organizations because they hit on quarterback. The Commanders are a team that I don't care about the pieces around them. Same with the Patriots. Like if they get the right guy, they're going to have a good quarterback. They're going to be a good team. So for me, at 2, if it's Jaden Daniels, great. If it's Drake May, then Drake May is my guy. But I think that the Commanders do take Jaden Daniels. There's been a lot of smoke on that. Again, I wouldn't. I'm not going to I'm not going to knock the process either way. They have 50 plus professionals trying to answer the same question that we are right now in what quarterback is going to be the franchise QB, right? So, and that's the most important thing. The Patriots are the first like true hot spot because when you look at the information surrounding this team, right? They went out and they did everything you could to prepare for potentially taking a quarterback. They went the first thing they did that 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 really sets the tone for quarterback is go out and get Alex Van Pelt, who has all the drills. He's the guy that's going to develop the QB as well as create the offensive playbook. But he worked with Aaron Rodgers, worked with all these guys. He is the first block for that. The other one that's really important to me is Ben McAdoo. And you might be saying, McAdoo, what the heck? Like he absolutely flamed out, was a terrible head coach with the Giants. But this guy, there are multiple people surrounding this guy that have backed up and verified these claims with no reason to go out of the way and verify him, that he is an incredible talent evaluator, not just at quarterback, but at every position, but especially at quarterback. And he's not the one saying it himself. A lot of times you'll have these guys with big egos being like, I'm the QB whisperer. I'm the guy that I knew Patrick Mahomes was going to be great, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't say that. It's other people that say, hey, by the way, McAdoo had Mahomes at one. McAdoo loved Josh Allen. McAdoo loved Lamar Jackson. McAdoo successfully faded Trubisky. He successfully faded all these other guys. Josh Rosen. He did not like Josh Rosen. He was advising the Panthers, and when the year with and Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis and Desmond Ritter, and he was like, nope, they're not here. They're not in this class. So McAdoo is a guy that I'm definitely going to listen to. If the Patriots take a QB at 3, I'm in. If they trade out, it'll be interesting. I mean, like, as the Vikings, it's got to scare you if the Patriots if the Patriots who need a quarterback are willing to trade you that pick. It's got to be pretty scary. So I think it goes Caleb Williams 1, Jaden Daniels 2, and then Drake May 3. But that Patriots pick could be on the block. It could be a quarterback. It could be something else. So that's the first hot spot. Next one at 4 is the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, for fantasy football, whatever wide receiver they take there is going to be a hot commodity. If they take Marvin Harrison Jr., I would love that because, first of all, it's how I have my mock draft. Second of all, it would give us the confirmation bias we need to rank Marvin Harrison Jr. 1. If they do take Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze, that does stir the pot a bit, and it does make us think. And for me personally, I will see how the rest of the draft pans out. And if they take Malik Neighbors there, and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze don't get drafted top 8, 9, 10, which would surprise me. But if that happens, I mean, we can't ignore that. We cannot ignore the investment being made into that player. So I have them taking Marvin Harrison Jr. in my mock. It's what I want to happen. It's what I think happens. But if it doesn't happen, we'll reassess. The biggest hotspot in my, and the Cardinals could trade out too. I don't have it in my mock, but they could trade out. A team could trade out, take a quarterback there. At 5, the Chargers are an obvious hotspot because they already have a quarterback, right? So do the Cardinals in Kyler Murray, in my opinion. But I mean, Justin Herbert's locked in, and the Chargers have a lot of work to do. I could see them taking a wide receiver. If they take a wide receiver there, we'll be very excited. If it's the first wide receiver off the board, that'll be our wide receiver 1 most likely. If it's the second wide receiver, that'll be our wide receiver 2 most likely, right? So, and the thing is with the Chargers is that they're kind of wide open. They don't have a ton of incumbent wide receivers that have specified roles. So it's not like they need to go and specifically get a big wide receiver or a small wide receiver or whatever. Whoever they take is going to be the guy. I think that my personal opinion now is in the way I have it in my mock. I think the Chargers trade out. I think this is where the Vikings move up using picks 11 and 23 and get their quarterback in JJ McCarthy. So that's what I'm predicting to happen for the Chargers, which would move the Vikings up to 5. And now the Chargers would have 2 picks in the first round plus more. It's probably going to cost you more than just 11 and 23 to do that. So that's what I have. 6, the Giants are absolutely a hot spot for fantasy football because not only do they have kind of questions and middle of the pack wide receivers right now, but Darren Waller obviously has a lot going on right now, but also could potentially be retired. So if the Giants take a wide receiver here, that 7 overall is high capital. We're talking guys like there's been a lot of big time hits in that range. The Mike Evans and AJ Green and Julio Jones and obviously Calvin Johnson, all these guys. There's been a few misses though, of course. Like you have guys like Corey Davis and Sammy Watkins. But I mean, if they take a guy there, we have to be in on that player. And I look at the Giants and say, let's say hypothetically the Cardinals take Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Chargers take JJ McCarthy. They trade up, take JJ McCarthy. At 6, I think Malik Neighbors is my wide receiver 2, and that's who I have them taking. But it wouldn't shock me if they took Rome Odunze over Malik Neighbors, simply because Odunze is a big split end, and they have the other guys. They have a field stretcher in Jalen Hyatt. They have a slot flanker in Wan'Dale Robinson. So he does fit the mold that way. And we've seen teams split hairs in the past, right? To us as fantasy football fans, it is, and people that invest a ton in this and spend a lot of time on this and have our opinions, it's seemingly egregious to us that a team would consider very small details in deciding between one or two wide receivers, but we've seen that happen in the past. And don't be shocked if that's the case. Don't be shocked if they're not as passionate as you are that Malik Neighbors is definitively better than Roma Dunze, right? We've seen the Dolphins came out and told us that they were debating between two Alabama wide receivers, Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith. And when you listen to what the coaches and the GM said at the time, the big difference was that Jalen Waddle could play special teams. I'm not kidding. They said that Jalen Waddle offered the versatility and the floor that comes with being a guy that returns kicks, returns punts. And that was one of the key difference makers in picking Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle. Now, both players hit, so it doesn't sound silly, but you have to keep in mind that these teams might be splitting hairs. So it's not that crazy for a Dunze to go above Neighbors, and that doesn't mean that a Dunze is going to be the better fantasy asset than Neighbors. So we have to keep the entire narrative of the draft in mind, not just draft capital, but fit, landing spot, team need, everything. And with our following the draft, we're going to go through and update all the rankings, all the articles, and tell you all about that. So we're going to do our best to hammer that all in there. But just keep that in mind. Like that's not them saying this guy is better definitively than that other guy. It's potentially them saying, "Hey, Roma Dunze fits what we need better." Right. So I think at 6, Giants could trade up, they could trade out, but I think it's wide receiver there. The Titans are probably the first true cold spot, quote unquote, in my opinion, because a lot of these are interesting in the beginning, and then I think the Titans are pretty set on taking an offensive line, whether Joe Alt is there or it's somebody else. The Titans went out of their way this offseason to add Calvin Ridley. They already added DeAndre Hopkins. They added Tony Pollard. They've got their weapons, and I think they trust their quarterback. I think it makes all the sense in the world for the Titans to sit back and say, we'll just take whatever the best offensive line is. So to me, cold spot. But hey, you know what? Maybe they trade out. Maybe they do something crazy. But I think that's kind of what that's going to be. At 8, the Falcons are, in my opinion, are likely taking a defensive player. They spent a lot of money on Darnell Mooney to be the flanker opposite of Drake London. They already have Kyle Pitts. They have Bijan Robinson. They have Tyler Algier. Not really a spot. I mean, maybe they do go wide receiver. I wouldn't like it for fantasy, but maybe they do. I think they take defense. But in my mock draft, I kind of spiced up this spot a little bit. I have the Saints trading up here to take Roma Dunze. So I have Malik Neighbor. I have Marvin Harrison to the Cardinals, Malik Neighbors to the Giants. I have the Saints trading up, taking Roma Dunze to replace Michael Thomas on the outside, which allows you put him at split end. That allows Chris Olave to play slot, play flanker, move around, get creative, get better matchups. I think would be a huge move for the Saints team and the Saints team that has money issues. Having a wide receiver that's a very expensive position under contract for 4 years plus the 5th-year option would make a lot of sense. So that's probably my most spicy move here that I don't see a lot of people having is I have the Saints trading up to 9 to take Roma Dunze. And the other thought process on that for the Falcons is this. You listen to what Bill Belichick said uh, about on the Pat McAfee show. If you haven't heard it, definitely check out his interview. He basically said that sometimes he'll be 100% locked on a player, but he'll still trade, right? So the example he gave was just last year with Christian Gonzalez. They were one. He said we were 100% taking Christian Gonzalez with that pick, but he knew that the Jets with Sauce Gardner and Michael Carter the third, and all the loaded up defensive backs they have over there, that they weren't going to take Christian Gonzalez at that pick, right? So they traded back with the Steelers, and the Steelers took Broderick Jones, which just so happened to be the player that the Jets wanted, right? But the only risk to him would be that somebody would trade up and take that player in that spot, right? Why do I bring this all up? Well, I think that the Falcons are very familiar with the edge rushers in this class, and I think that they can confidently collect a little bit of extra value and trade back from 8 and let and get more value and then still take a good edge rusher. So that's what I think the Falcons do. I think they trade back. I think at 9, the Bears, a lot of people are going to want them. Fantasy wishing world says, "Oh, you drafted a quarterback, now draft a wide receiver." And then, it'll be they'll grow together and it'll be amazing. Oh, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, like in our minds, that's what we want. But they went out and spent a ton to get weapons, right? They went out and got Keenan Allen. They already have DJ Moore. They went out and got Keenan Allen. They already have Cole Kmet. They went out and got Gerald Everett. They already had Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert. They went out and got DeAndre Swift. Why do we need to overdo it? Why do we look at Ryan Poles and say you have to do more? It's not necessary. The team is going to rotate tight ends under Shane Waldron. Shane Waldron was the tight end coach for the Rams when they drafted Gerald Everett. He brought Gerald Everett to the Seahawks. Yeah, he's going to use Gerald Everett. He's going to use Cole Kmet. You don't need a third wide receiver. The wide receiver in that offense isn't going to have a full-time role. So I personally don't like that idea. But teams do draft for the future, and Keenan Allen's up there in age, so maybe they do take a wide receiver. I think they just take defense. Sorry to be boring, but that's what I have in that spot. And I think in my own mock draft at 9, I have the Bears taking Jared Verse, an edge rusher. And Jared Verse is the pick I have there because and I know this is a fantasy football podcast, but Jared Verse, he's more of a two-way type player. He's good in the run and he's good versus the pass, which makes him a better fit for Matt Eberflus's 4-3, right? So that's my thought process on Jared Verse there. Next pick is the Jets. Everyone is like, oh, Brock Bowers be amazing. I don't think they do it. I think they go offensive line. I have them taking Talise Fuaga, and I've just been looking at what the GM and coach have been saying, and they're preparing people to be disappointed. The coach, the last interview I saw, he not only alluded to them potentially taking a lineman, but he specifically mentioned that it would be nice if that lineman were to start, but that's not a guarantee. That sometimes you take depth and the player takes time to develop. And in this case, with Tyron Smith with his being injury prone, and then bringing in a couple guys like Morgan Moses, like a couple linemen from the Ravens, I think that there's a real possibility that they're drafting a swing tackle who probably is going to play a ton with the injuries and the uncertainty, but that could be the case there. And part of the reason that I have it that way is I think as part of my trade up earlier, the Vikings pick at 11. I think the Vikings trade up, and I could see the Chargers at 11 taking Brock Bowers. That would be the ultimate landing spot. There's a little bit of fantasy wishing there. I've talked to death on the show that I think that's the best possible landing spot for him to be the Mark Andrews in Greg Roman's offense for that team. So that's what I would like to see. That's what my mock draft is what I think is going to happen. So that's what I have. 12, another absolute hot spot here is the Broncos, right? Because of the rumors regarding Bo Nix. And I will say this, Sean Payton knows what he wants to do. He wants to run a dink and dunk, highly conservative, protective, high accuracy, low A dot offense that he ran for years and years with Drew Brees. And that's why he's bringing in his players and he's trading away players like Jerry Jeudy and he's cutting Russell Wilson and he's bringing guys he trusts and he brings in Joe Lombardi, who is the most dink and dunk dude in the world. And the Broncos last year led all teams in passes to the running back. So he's looking around and saying, who can do this job? Who is accurate in short area passing? Zach Wilson and Bo Nix. And I think that the Broncos could take Bo Nix at 12. They could trade back and take somebody else. A lot of people are like, oh, yeah, just trade back. This isn't fantasy football. If you think you have a franchise quarterback at pick 12, then you just pick that guy. So I think they just pick Bo Nix. Like, imagine you do all this work and you say Bo Nix is the guy. We believe that Bo Nix is the guy. We're not going to take him. We're going to trade back. And then you trade back and somebody else takes Bo Nix. You know how bad that would suck, how embarrassing that would be. And it happens all the time. But at quarterback, you cannot get cute like that. So if they like Bo Nix, they're taking him at 12. I think it would be ridiculous to trade back and throw the cards up in the air and say, well, I hope this card lands right here. Like you have the card already. So I think they take him there. Next 13, Raiders, boring. I think they take defense. They have Devontae Adams. They have Jacoby Myers. They already took a tight end. They're not going to take a running back there. So, and I think they're set with they could take a quarterback, but I think they take defense. I think they take a cornerback. I have them taking Terry and Arnold, but Cooper DeJean, any of these guys, doesn't really matter. At 14, that's where I have that's the Saints pick, but I have them trading up to take a Dunze. So for me, that's where the Falcons would take their edge rusher. I have Dallas Turner. Could be a number of guys. I know that Latu, people are saying, oh, because he played for Jimmy Lake in Washington that they're going to pick him. That one confuses me a little bit because anyone that was following that, uh, Latu had a crazy injury, and Jimmy Lake's staff didn't clear him to play. They basically told him he should medically retire, and he had to transfer and played for another team. Now, if Jimmy Lake believed this guy should stop playing football, that he had medical issues that would preclude him from having a career playing football, and that it was dangerous for him to play, why would Jimmy Lake and the Falcons draft him in the first round of the draft? That would be one of the biggest levels of admitting you were wrong that I think I've ever seen in a sport where ego is everything. So I don't really see them doing that, but hey, maybe he will come around and say, hey, you know what, my coaching staff was wrong, and we should have kept you in Washington. And I apologize to all the Washington fans because we were wrong. Like, I don't. That would take a lot. Maybe he is a big man and will do that, but I don't think so. So that's the Falcons. I'll go through a few more just real quick, getting to a couple hot spots. I think the Colts, if Brock Bowers is still there, would be great, but I think they probably take a cornerback at 15. The Seahawks at 16 for fantasy football. I mean, they have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, uh, Jackson Smith and Jigba. They have Noah Fant. They have two running backs that are good. There's not a fantasy relevant pick there. I think they go with offensive line or defense. I think I have Troy Fadnu. I'm still a couple of them. I'm still trying to figure out the spelling, the pronunciation, but that's why I have them taken. Jaguars. I think they go cornerback. I think they can. This is where I have them taking Cooper DeJean, but it could be Terry and Arnold. It could be Quinion Mitchell. Any of those guys. Bengals. To me, people want them to take a wide receiver. They want them to get Brock Bowers. They want them to do all this stuff. I think they probably take a defensive lineman, right? They lost DJ Reader. Interior defensive pass rush has become increasingly valuable in the NFL. So I think I have him taking Jerzon Newton, but Byron Murphy is another, whichever one. If you're a Bengals fan, they take either one of those guys. You can just go good. That's what we needed. That's a good player, right? It's not flashy, but it's exactly what you need. And you look around the NFL, like Javon Hargrave and Christian Wilkins and Christian Barmore and what Aaron Donald did. Like interior pass rush is a lot more valuable. So don't be disappointed by an interior defender. Jalen Carter went at 9 last year. He's an interior defender. Uh, the Rams lost Aaron Donald. They could take an interior defender at 19. That's where I have Latu going. I think that you have the benefit, and we talked about this with Brandon Huffman at the top of the show, that when you locally can have guys come in, 30 different players can come in, and any local guys don't count against those 30 guys. Latu both grew up in California, and then after he transferred out of Washington, transferred to UCLA. And so he is an obvious guy for them to bring in, and it's already been reported that they have medically cleared him. So the Rams went out of their way to say, hey, by the way, we have this guy medically cleared. So they could take Latu there. I think that's my pick for them. The Steelers, I think they go offensive line. A lot of people are saying they take Graham Barton there, but the way my mock draft has fallen, uh, J.C. Latham would be there, and they like Amarius Mims, they like Graham Barton, so I wouldn't be surprised if those are the picks. But J.C. Latham is he's a higher, my mind, a higher caliber player, and I think that's who the Steelers end up with. Next pick 21, the Dolphins. They could use defense or O line. I have them trading back, and not necessarily trading back because they want to trade back, but because there are two teams that are highly likely candidates to trade up. Those two teams are the Cardinals and the Commanders. The Cardinals and the Commanders essentially have, for lack of a better way of saying it, more picks than they know what to do. You really can't, like, with the capital these two teams have, you can't even make all those picks, right? Like the Cardinals have 6 picks in the top 100 and they pick at 104. So they're a big time candidate, in my opinion, to move up. So I have the Cardinals moving up and taking the best edge rusher for Jonathan Gannon here. That's Chop Robinson, in my opinion. So that's where Chop goes. Eagles at 22. That's another one. So the over under for trades is 6.5. For the first round, I think I have the sports books. I think I have 6 or 7, so I'm right there. I have the Packers trading up here and taking the other defensive interior player, Byron Murphy. But again, if the Bengals take Byron Murphy, then Jerzon Newton is the guy. So I think that's what the Packers have. The Packers are loaded on offense. The Packers, if anything, need to trade a wide receiver away or a tight end away, not draft wide receiver and tight end. They have a quarterback. They just paid Josh Jacobs. They're not going to do anything fantasy relevant in the first round or anywhere here unless it's trading someone away. So I think they take Byron Murphy. At 23, this is where the Vikings would be picking. I have them trading back. Again, I have the Chargers trading up. Sorry, I have the Vikings trading up with the Chargers. I have the Chargers taking this pick. And people, again, if that happens, Chargers fans at this spot are going to want them to take a wide receiver, but I have them taking uh, the best possible offensive lineman, which in this case is Amarius Mims. At 24, this pick would be great for fantasy football. It's a hot spot for sure. The Cowboys, if they get Brian Thomas Jr., who is my wide receiver four, a lot of people's wide receiver four, that would be perfect for what they want to do because CeeDee Lamb plays a lot of slot and he plays a lot of flanker. So you take Brian Thomas Jr., you make him the split end, like a T. Higgins or a Mike Evans, then you have CeeDee Lamb can do the Chris Godwin, Jamar Chase thing and line up everywhere and run all over the place. So that would be amazing for the Cowboys if it can happen. They might need to trade up if they want Brian Thomas, but in my mock, the way I had it set up, it fell perfectly to them. 25. This would be the back end of my Packers trade. I think the Eagles. I think they take a corner. I think they go defense. They've got two great wide receivers. They have Dallas Goedert. They have Saquon Barkley now. They went out and got a couple options for slot. I don't think they're going to go crazy drafting a slot wide receiver. And if they do, I don't like that landing spot for fantasy football one bit. So we don't want that to happen. Next pick for me is the Buccaneers pick here. I think the Commanders trade up again. They have a ton of capital, and I have the Commanders taking Kool-Aid McKinstry. Uh, at 27 would be the back half of my Cardinals trade with the Dolphins, and this is where I think the Dolphins would take Graham Barton. He's a center or guard, and that's what they need because they have two tackles. They have Teron Armstead. They have Austin Jackson. That's why I have the Dolphins trading back and not taking Amarius Mims. Amarius Mims is a beast. Like he's a big boy. You can't just a lot of these guys you can say, okay, we'll start him. He could be a tackle, he could be a guard. Amarius Mims is a big boy. He can't be a guard. He really kind of has to be a tackle. So that's what I think there. 28, no, that's the big hot spot with the Bills. I mean, that is where a guy like if we're Dalton Kincaid fans here, so we don't want them to take like anybody that gets a ton of targets or soaks up targets. The Bills, if they could take a Xavier Worthy or Troy Franklin, who is kind of a field stretcher. And, again, these guys can do it all. And I think it's a good landing spot for fantasy, but they might not command 150 targets like some of these guys. A nice guy that can get like 120 targets or, 100 targets, then Dalton Kincaid can still live. So Troy Franklin or Xavier Worthy there would be nice. Adonai Mitchell, there's a bunch of guys that could potentially go there. And they have slot guys. They have Dalton Kincaid in the slot. They have Curtis Samuel. They have Khalil Shakir. It's not going to be a slot guy. It's going to be outside guy. At 29, I have the Lions trading back and the Raiders trading up and taking Michael Penix Jr. just to take advantage of that fifth-year option that you get as for a first-round pick. So that's where I have that happen. And then I wrap it up. Ravens, I think O-line. 49ers, I think O-line. And then Chiefs, that's a fun one. They could trade back. They could take offensive line. They could take defense. Or they could take wide receiver, right? With Rashee Rice being suspended potentially, they might need more help there. The second wide receiver on the team in terms of targets last year was Justin Watson with 53. Gross. So they could take anybody here. Lad McConkey's a popular pick. And to me, people are like, oh, he's going to be a slot because he's a white guy. People are like, oh, yeah, he's a white slot receiver like Julian Edelman. Well, it's funny that comp is like almost back. It's right, but it's right for the wrong reasons. Because Julian Edelman, if you go back and look at the numbers and watch the games, he didn't just play slot. He played just as many snaps out wide. He was more like a Cooper Kupp or these other guys that played every snap and moved all over the formation. And that's what I think Lad McConkey is. So people doing the Lad McConkey comp, Julian Edelman comp, they're to say, oh, he's just a slot wide receiver. This guy isn't Hunter Renfrow. This guy is a full every play, all over the formation guy. So that's it. That's what I think for the first round. Again, now is the time. If you want to do a rookie draft, right, then you need a dynasty team. And you can go get one today over at myffpc.com. If you deposit 35 bucks or more and use promo code Coop, they'll give you 25 bucks. So you deposit 35 bucks, they give you 25. Now you have 70 bucks to go and buy a orphan dynasty team, a team that somebody abandoned, right? You go through, look at the roster, make sure they have some picks, right? And you look at who the players are you love, you put them aside. So we're going to keep these guys. You look at the players that you could be indifferent on. You leave them right in the middle. You look at the players that you don't like, and you immediately put them on the trade block, and you start sending out trades because other people like them. We don't like them, but other people do. It's great to have carte blanche and a reason, an excuse to trade guys away. It's fun to trade in fantasy. So you go over there, buy that team, and then guess what? Right after the draft, all our rookie rankings, everything will be up at fantasyalarm.com, and you get to do a rookie draft. You get to skip all the nonsense that comes with the startup draft, all that stuff. You get to dive right in on Wednesday before the draft. And then the Monday after the draft, or whenever the rookie draft is, you're already doing rookie drafts, right? So you just get to fast forward. It's the best way to play, in my opinion. So go to myffpc.com, use promo code Coop. They'll give you 35 bucks. You deposit 25 or more. That's what's up. So, hey, thank you guys for hanging out in the chat today. Thank you, Matt Deutsch behind the glass. Special shout out to Brandon Huffman, one of our very favorites, who comes in, crushes it with the tight end analysis, crushes it with the knowing who the dogs are, talking to these guys, boots on the ground, and make sure if you can't afford to do so, if you're doing okay these days, I know not everybody can afford to just, to donate money to charities and stuff like that. But if you can't afford it, throw a little money to the Avery Foundation and make sure to support that cause. One last thing I do want to mention here to everybody: if you're not involved yet, we have a contest going right now for the draft. The draft is tomorrow. So our contest over at Reddit. In fact, we have two contests right now for you. One of them's free. One you have to donate. So the one pinned to my profile on Reddit, you donate, and you can win autographed jerseys. There are 4 spots for Scott Fishbowl up for grabs, and if we get to $4,000, there'll be 5 spots in the contest. And there's a 6th one if you just comment. That's on Reddit right now. So go get set up with that. We're also, for you Fantasy Alarm members, we're doing a little contest on Better Edge where you can win some Fantasy Alarm swag. You can win, some T-shirts, stuff like that. You can win a month of the All Pro membership, and that one's going to be free on Better Edge. So keep an eye out for all that stuff. It's all popping. It's draft week. Get fired up. You can catch me tomorrow talking draft on SiriusXM with Howard and Jim Bowden from 5 to 7 Eastern time, both Thursday and Friday. But that's it for us. Thank you so much, guys. We will catch you guys on the other side.